Praised be Jesus Christ. Well, a very happy new year to you all. And that might seem a little jargon because we usually say that on January 1st and as we turn the calendar year. But as we begin the season of Advent, we also begin a new liturgical year, and it's a fitting greeting to you all. And as we begin this new liturgical year, it gives us an opportunity to reflect on the sacredness of time. In Catholic theology, the sacredness of time arises from its intimate connection to God's eternal plan. Time, as we experience, is a linear progression. There is a past, a present, a future. But when the divine nature, who is before all time and without time, enters into our linear progression of time through the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus Christ, time is sanctified, making every moment part of the fullness of time. And that fullness of time and that moment in spiritual thinking and spiritual thought is known as the sacrament of the present moment. That God's grace is always available to us at every moment of our life. This is what makes the liturgical year so important for us as Christians, because it allows us to immerse ourselves into the mystery of salvation, allowing Kairos. In Christian theology, we come to understand Kairos as God's time, to intersect with Chronos, the passing of time as we experience. It allows us to recognize that God's grace is present at every moment. To remind us of this sacredness of time within God's plan, we light candles on an Advent wreath. We light candles as time progresses, week after week, one candle, then the next. But we do this on a circular wreath, representing eternity that has no beginning or end. And then we see the wreath itself covered in evergreen branches, reminding us that God's time is always fresh, it's always new, and it refreshes us. And when we immerse ourselves into God's time, our Christian life bears fruit. Now, to really emphasize this intersection of Kairos and Chronos and the sacredness of time, our readings today are quite similar to what we heard last week. Literally, we sing the same psalm, same tune, same psalm refrain, Psalm 122. And while the sacred author of the gospel changes from one liturgical year to the next, in this case from St. Luke's to St. Matthew's account, the discourse remains the same. However, rather than seeing these readings through the lens of who Jesus is, the King of the universe, as we begin the season of Advent, we now have this sacred rhythm that allows us to prepare our hearts and renew our ardent desire for both his historical commemoration at the Nativity, Christmas Day, and his second coming. We wait for the King to come. And in that period of waiting becomes a period of preparation. To focus that lens a little bit more, the prophet Isaiah's vision of nations streaming to the Lord's mountain in peace, and Paul's urgent call to keep awake amid the nearing day of salvation, Advent urges vigilant conversion and expectant hope, transforming ordinary time into a space of spiritual anticipation. But for us in our modern world, this spiritual anticipation, this waiting, anticipating something, has become quite a problem because of the busyness that we are caught up in, the noise that is around us. You know how much time in our life we actually spend waiting? Think about how many times you've stopped at a red light and you're waiting for it to turn green. Think about the amount of times you've queued up in a line, waiting. Think about the wait time that you've spent at a doctor's office or at a hospital. How much time in our life we're spent waiting. And what do we do to fill that time of waiting? But then we also have the experience that while we wait, time is flying. It goes by so fast. Even as we approach the season of Advent and are now in it, a new liturgical year, I ask myself the question, where did November go? Where did the fall go? I thought we were just at summer and beginning this all again. And so the season of Advent gives us this opportunity to reflect, to slow down, and to immerse ourselves into God's eternal plan, that sacrament of the present moment, the grace that is available for us at each moment of our life, even as we wait, so that we prepare and renew our desire. When we do this, and we allow that grace to enter into my moment, then I get to see my life, my history, within the greater context of salvation history, that God is written and is still writing. This first week of Advent allows us to slow down. And Holy Mother Church gives us the opportunity to enter into that very much slow down and teaches us how to wait within that by entering into the messianic expectation that the Jewish people had, waiting for the Messiah. The Pharisees and the ancient Jewish people who lived with this messianic hope had an understanding that there was the time before the fall, the present age, filled with sin, death, corruption, and then the age to come, the messianic age, which is free from sin, death, Satan, victory. The prophet Isaiah speaks about that, where there will be no more wars, where swords will be turned into plowshares. The phrase that we would see in the Old Testament that sees that expectant hope, that messianic expectation, reminding them that they are living in the present age and there is an age to come, a future that is bright and hope-filled, is the phrase the latter days, or as we hear in our translation, in days to come. These days mark when the covenant people will see the rising star of a ruler, will see the restoration of Israel from exile, will see the exaltation of Zion and the ingathering of the nations, the reign of the Davidic king, and the worldwide expansion of God's kingdom. But for the ancient Jewish people, they thought with the coming of the Messiah, all these things would be fulfilled. And they are in the person of Jesus, the star that rises in Bethlehem, that leads the Magi to him, the restoration of Israel from exile, brought free, rescued from the slavery of sin, death, and Satan, the exaltation of Zion and the ingathering of nations, all have streamed towards the heavenly temple, Jesus Christ, to worship him. He is the Davidic king who comes, and through his church, that expansion of his kingdom. But these expectations and this fulfillment is not in the way that they wanted, and so they still wait. But for us, in our understanding, it has come, but not yet. We still live in a present age, but we also live in an age to come. The latter days then are not the same as the last days of history, sometimes called the end times. The expression points itself to a fulfillment and a flow of history when God's purposes for Israel and the world realize something even more, something greater is about. So as St. Paul reminds us through the ancient Roman community, now is not the time to become lethargic or complacent. Now is the time that we wait, and in that waiting we prepare, and we renew our desire for God, the King, to come again. And we do that through our prayer. Prayer helps us sanctify our time. It allows us to live in the present moment as we're called to pray continuously. But what are some of the helps that we've been given for this? The first, I think, is very beautiful, especially as we enter the season of Advent, is the Angelus prayer. For those of you who've come from European towns or other places within the Greater Toronto Area, you would hear these bells rung. 6 a.m., 12 noon, 6 p.m. These are reminders to pray the Angelus, or in the Easter season, the Regina Caeli. And there in the Angelus prayer, we hear the words of the angel. We hear Mary's fiat, and we enter into that moment where God became man. How can we not have time sanctified when we recognize that eternity entered into time? The Liturgy of the Hours is another way that the church prays continuously, sanctifying the hours. Priests, deacons, religious, consecrated, we're all called to pray our Liturgy of the Hours, to pray with the church and for the church, with the intentions that are required. But that's not just reserved to the clergy and the religious. Everyone can do this. You can use the apps that are available. You don't even need to buy the books. And it helps you kind of sanctify your day. Morning prayer, evening prayer, night prayer. Pillars for you to enter into God's time, to slow down, and to wait for the Lord. The last little thing which we can do in our prayer life to sanctify our time is something I learned in seminary formation, where we can take our waking hours of the day and put an intention to each hour. We write that down, we place it somewhere that we'll see on a regular basis, daily, hopefully. And then every time we walk by it, we know what each hour is meant to be offered for. So when you're doing your work, when you're doing the laundry, when you're at your desk, whatever it might be, when you're out for a walk, you know at that time, when you're doing that action or that activity, it can be offered up for a particular intention. A beautiful way to sanctify time, to make it holy. And the most beautiful thing that we have within our prayer life to sanctify our week is our worship. To come to God each Sunday. And there we meet the God who enters into our time again and again every time we celebrate the Mass. And there in the host that we receive, the sacrament, grace given, God received into our hearts. And then we're not just passing time, we're allowing us to be consumed by eternity. And so as we begin this Advent season, once again, an opportunity for us to reflect on how precious time is, a gift given by God, and not to waste it, not to fill it with useless noise and doom scrolling, but a time to encounter the living God who wants to meet us and come into our hearts so that we can live his life in this world.